I want you to picture a specific conversation. You know, the one you have been actively postponing.
Oh, absolutely. The face that just flashed into your mind the exact second you said that.
Right, exactly. If you are listening to this on your commute into the hospital right now, or, well, maybe driving home after a completely exhausting list in theater, you know exactly the one I mean.
It's always there in the background, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's usually with a colleague, perhaps a senior partner in your orthopedic practice,
Hmm.
or maybe a key multidisciplinary team member you have to interact with every single day.
And it's never a minor thing.
No, exactly. There's something specific, something really crucial that you need to say to them about their behavior. And you've been meaning to bring it up for weeks, maybe even months.
You don't. Because we always find an excuse.
We do. Every single time you find yourself in the same room, every time the moment almost presents itself, say, grabbing a coffee between cases or passing in the corridor, you find this highly logical, completely bulletproof reason to avoid it.
Right. You tell yourself the timing just isn't quite right.
Exactly that. You think, well, they look a bit too stressed today, or, they just dealt with a really complex trauma admission, or perhaps you are simply too drained from your own clinical load to deal with it.
Which is incredibly common. We tell ourselves quite convincingly that it can just wait until next week.
Yeah, but it doesn't just wait, does it? Welcome to Deep Dive Ortho, by the way. Our mission today is to tackle this exact issue.
And it is a massive issue because the reality of waiting in a high-stakes clinical environment is, well, it's never passive.
Right, we trick ourselves into believing that postponing a difficult conversation is equivalent to, I don't know, pausing a film.
Like the situation just remained static until we were ready to press play.
Exactly. But what is fascinating here is that the psychological reality is entirely different, isn't it?
Completely different. While you are delaying, the underlying issue is quietly metastasizing. It's spreading.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. It metastasizes.
Yeah, and you find yourself constructing these elaborate, completely exhausting workarounds just to function alongside this person.
Right, like asking the rota coordinator to ensure you aren't on call on the same weekends.
Exactly. Or you might route your patients through an entirely different clinical pathway just to avoid a joint consultation with them.
Which means you are expending vast, unrecognized reserves of mental energy simply managing your own avoidance.
Spot on. And what you ultimately realize, often far too late, is that your relationship with this colleague is no longer defined by the shared clinical goals you have.
Right, or by the professional words you exchange.
No, it's being entirely shaped and heavily distorted by the conversation you have chosen not to have.
That is so true. So today we are taking a deep dive into arguably the most consequential yet universally least taught skill in clinical work.
Navigating interpersonal conflict.
Exactly. The material we are analyzing today provides a profoundly practical framework for these exact high-anxiety moments.
It's vital stuff. We are going to explore exactly why we systematically postpone these interactions.
Right, and how to recognize the definitive red flags that mean we absolutely must have them.
Plus, how to precisely and surgically initiate the dialogue without, triggering a massive defensive explosion.
Yeah, and what to do when the interaction inevitably deviates from our idealized script. Because let's face it, these things rarely go perfectly.
They almost never do, and this is a critical undertaking. Because if we observe the broader landscape of modern medicine,
Especially high-intensity surgical specialties.
absolutely, especially there, we quickly see a glaring truth. Most of the severe dysfunction within clinical teams is not clinical in nature.
Wait, really? You think it's mostly interpersonal?
I do. The systems generally work. The technical parameters of the work are usually executed to an exceptionally high standard.
That's true. The surgeries and diagnoses are executed well. The implants are placed perfectly.
Exactly. The immediate patient care protocols function exactly as intended. The true drain on the system, the insidious factor that leads to widespread burnout.
And catastrophic medical errors, frankly.
Yes, and the complete dissolution of otherwise brilliant clinical teams. It is all unaddressed interpersonal friction.
Right. It's the colleague who subtly but consistently undermines your clinical decisions during the morning handover.
Or the partner who has quietly checked out of their administrative and governance responsibilities, leaving the rest of the department to carry their weight.
Yeah, it's that unvoiced grievance, that knot in your stomach you've been carrying around the ward for 6 months.
And there is a profound paradox here, isn't there?
Oh, a massive one. I see this all the time, particularly for those of you listening who are mid to senior level surgeons, physicians, or clinical leads.
Your training has rigorously prepared you to manage acute life or death crises.
Exactly. You can operate under immense physiological and psychological pressure. If a patient crashes on the table, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in.
Your training takes over entirely.
Yeah, and you can identify and intervene in complex cascading pathologies without a second of hesitation. I mean, you command the room.
You do. Yet this exact same intensive decades-long training leaves you entirely unequipped to simply sit across from a peer in a quiet office.
Just to tell them their behavior is damaging the team. It's wild.
It is a striking juxtaposition. We are conditioned to be aggressively decisive when the stakes are biological.
But we become profoundly avoidant, almost timid, when the stakes are interpersonal.
Precisely. So if we acknowledge this massive deficit in our professional training, we must then understand the specific etiology of this avoidance.
We need to diagnose the cause. Why does this happen, and why is it so uniquely difficult within the specific hierarchical ecosystem of a medical environment?
Because in orthopedics, we cannot treat a complex pathology until we thoroughly understand its origin in biomechanics, right?
Exactly, and the exact same principle applies to communication breakdowns.
So let's treat this avoidance exactly as we would treat a complex clinical diagnosis of workplace dysfunction.
I love that. Our material provides a really systematic breakdown of the 5 distinct barriers that prevent medical professionals from having these conversations.
Let's look at barrier 1, the unified front norm.
Oh, this one is baked into us from the very first day of medical school, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The entire culture of medicine is built upon a foundation of perceived infallibility and absolute unbroken collaboration.
Yeah, from those early days on the wards right through to becoming a senior consultant, there is this immense implicit pressure to present a unified, seamless front.
You present this front to the patients so they feel safe.
And to the hospital administration so they feel the department is stable.
Exactly. Within this cultural framework, open conflict, even when it is entirely justified and clinically necessary, feels inherently unprofessional.
It's like the prevailing unspoken norm dictates that you just absorb the friction privately. You smooth things over.
You ensure the machine keeps running no matter how much the gears are grinding beneath the surface.
Which creates a deeply unfair, almost gaslighting dynamic, doesn't it? For the individual who finally decides the friction can no longer be absorbed.
It does, because when you are the one who breaks that unspoken rule, when you finally raise your hand and say, actually, the way this person speaks to the junior registrars is completely unacceptable.
The culture often turns on you.
Exactly. You end up feeling as though you are the one being difficult or inappropriate
Right.
simply because you have chosen to name the problem.
The problem that everyone else has tacitly agreed to ignore in the name of this unified front. You become the disruptor.
And systems, much like biological organisms, crave homeostasis. Even if that homeostasis is toxic, it is predictable.
Right. The system often prefers the quiet dysfunction over the loud, messy work of resolution.
Which is why so many brilliant clinicians simply choose the path of least resistance. Silence.
But that unified front is really just the broad cultural layer. The real terrifying trap is the timeline, which brings us to the second barrier.
The sheer weight of long-term proximity.
Yeah, you aren't just absorbing this friction for a week while someone covers a shift. In clinical medicine, you do not just work with someone for a few months and then move on.
No, you are looking at a colleague and realizing you share the same on-call rota for the next 15 years.
I often think of this like a surgical implant.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy. How so?
Well, when you place a titanium prosthesis, it is not a fleeting, temporary intervention. You are marrying that implant to the bone. It is a permanent alteration of the landscape.
Right.
Similarly, bringing up a deep-seated grievance does not feel like a one-off encounter. You are acutely aware that the words you say today are going to shape the dynamic for the next 10 or 15 years of working alongside this specific individual.
And the perceived permanence of that intervention creates an immense psychological barrier. And rightly so, to be fair.
Because if it goes poorly, you haven't just ruined a Tuesday afternoon.
Exactly. You have poisoned your immediate working environment for the next decade. Given that perceived risk, postponing the conversation feels like a highly rational survival strategy.
Even if it's ultimately self-destructive to your own well-being. And while you're employing that survival strategy, you are dealing with the third barrier,
Which is?
the asymmetry of caring. I find this one resonates most deeply and often most painfully with the clinicians I speak with.
Yes, the burden almost always falls on the person who is already carrying the larger psychological load.
By definition, the person who notices the dysfunction, who loses sleep over it, cares far more about the health of the team than the person who is actively creating the dysfunction.
It is a profound inequity in the workplace. The individual generating the toxic behavior is often entirely insulated from its effects.
Right, they just go home, have a glass of wine, and sleep perfectly soundly.
Meanwhile, the requirement to initiate the difficult conversation, to carefully plan the words, to manage the fallout, falls entirely on the individual who is already exhausted.
Because they have spent the last 6 months having to work around the problem in the first place,
Yeah.
it feels deeply unjust.
It breeds a very specific, potent type of resentment. You are furious that you are the one forced to act like the adult in the room and resolve it.
Exactly. Why should I have to clean up a mess I didn't make? Why should I have to fix their personality defect?
It is uncompensated emotional labor. And it frequently leads directly into the fourth barrier, which is rooted in harsh reality.
The fear of retaliation.
Yes. We must be pragmatic here. The medical field is intensely hierarchical, and it contains individuals who respond exceptionally poorly to any form of feedback.
The colleague who retaliates, who launches an aggressive counterattack, or begins a subtle campaign of professional marginalization. We all know who these people are.
We do. And this fear shapes team dynamics profoundly. When one brave person attempts to hold a boundary and that person is subsequently targeted,
Right, their operating lists suddenly get changed, their referrals dry up.
the rest of the team watches this happen and learns a swift, silent lesson.
They learn that silence is the safest currency in the department. The fear of becoming the next target enforces a collective omerta.
It's a calculated risk assessment in an environment where your professional reputation is critical to your livelihood.
But here's the tragic irony. This protective mechanism feeds directly into the fifth and final barrier.
The complete atrophy of skill.
Yes. Because these conversations are systematically avoided, clinicians simply never, ever practice having them.
Okay, let's be real for a second and play devil's advocate here.
Go on.
If I look around a major orthopedic department, I am looking at senior consultants who have been navigating the brutal politics of a major hospital for 20 years.
Right.
Surely, we assume they have figured this out through sheer osmosis. Does the skill of managing interpersonal conflict not naturally improve with time and seniority?
It's a perfectly logical assumption, but our material clarifies that the reality on the ground is fundamentally different. Time and service does not equate to competence if that time has been spent entirely in avoidance.
Because there is no deliberate practice.
Exactly. Every single difficult interaction feels exactly like the first one. Think of it clinically. A senior consultant may have performed 3,000 complex knee revisions,
Refining their surgical technique each time, yeah.
but they may have only attempted 2 or 3 truly difficult face-to-face interpersonal confrontations in their entire career.
And those probably went badly because they were winging it.
Right. The communication skill atrophies precisely because it is never exercised. So regardless of how many titles they have after their name, having the conversation induces the exact same autonomic stress response as it would in a terrified first-year house officer.
That is a staggering realization. Highly experienced professionals who possess the conflict resolution skills of absolute novices.
Purely due to a systemic lack of exposure.
So acknowledging these 5 barriers removes the shame. You aren't avoiding it because you were weak. You're avoiding it because the system encourages avoidance.
It is the diagnostic foundation we need. We understand exactly why we wait. The next logical progression is to determine when we can no longer afford to wait. Right. When does the cost of silence outweigh the risk of speaking up? This brings us to Section 2, interpersonal triage.
Clinicians are absolute masters of clinical triage. You can look at a chaotic emergency department and instantly stratify risk.
You know exactly what will kill the patient in the next 5 minutes and what can safely wait until the next day.
Yet, when faced with interpersonal dynamics, that finely tuned triage capacity completely fails. We fall into the trap of the non-urgent.
Because most difficult conversations do not present as an immediate bleeding crisis. No one's airway is compromised if you do not tell your colleague today that their tone is destroying team morale.
Right, so your brain's threat detection system simply doesn't flag it as a priority. It falls to the bottom of the list.
So we need clear, objective criteria for when a conversation moves from elective to mandatory. The have it now red flags.
The first is obvious, but frequently ignored. The issue is directly affecting patient care.
That is the absolute non-negotiable red line. If a colleague's aggressive style makes junior nurses hesitate to escalate a deteriorating patient at 3 a.m. because they fear being shouted at.
The conversation is no longer about professional courtesy. It is a severe patient safety imperative.
But the indicators extend beyond immediate patient harm, don't they?
Yes, active avoidance is a massive red flag. If you are physically restructuring your day, altering your route through the corridors, manipulating the theater schedule simply to avoid them, the situation is critical.
Your operational efficiency and your own mental health are being compromised. You are no longer managing the situation. The avoidance is managing you.
I want to focus on another key indicator mentioned in the framework, which is the concept of leakage.
Oh, leakage. This is fascinating.
It really is. This occurs when the immense resentment you are caring about an unaddressed issue begins to leak out into other, completely unrelated areas of your work.
Right, so you start snapping at the scrub nurse over a minor instrument issue. Or you become deeply cynical in the doctor's mess.
Exactly. Or engaging in passive-aggressive behaviors towards the colleague. Intentionally delaying responses to their emails, making subtle, undermining comments.
It's like an undrained abscess.
Spot on. The pressure builds and builds until it inevitably finds an alternative, often far more destructive pathway out.
If that unsaid grievance starts altering your baseline professional character, you have definitively waited too long. You're becoming part of the toxicity.
And if you objectively observe that the behavior will absolutely continue without intervention, if you've been ruminating on it for weeks, having imaginary arguments in the shower.
The diagnostic window for waiting has closed. You must act. But to be fair, the material does establish specific wait criteria too, right?
Yeah.
Valid delays.
Yes, waiting is only valid if it is a genuine issue of timing. For instance, if the colleague is in the midst of an acute personal crisis, a divorce, a bereavement,
or the department is managing a declared major incident. It is tactically unwise to introduce an interpersonal grievance then.
But crucially, a valid wait is measured in days or perhaps a week or two at the absolute maximum, not months.
If you are telling yourself you are waiting for things to calm down and your timeline is 6 months, that is just avoidance disguised as patience.
Absolutely. And there is one critical contraindication to having the conversation: anger.
Yes. If you are acutely, physiologically angry, you must wait. Anger guarantees the conversation will fail.
It is the equivalent of operating in a contaminated field. You are almost guaranteeing a poor outcome before you even make the incision.
Because your amygdala has hijacked your prefrontal cortex, it narrows your focus, diminishes empathy, and guarantees the other person will adopt a defensive posture.
You will not have a conversation. You will have a shouting match.
You also need to wait if you lack clarity. If you are furious but cannot articulate the specific behavior, you aren't ready.
So the overarching principle is, the default setting for almost all medical professionals is to wait far too long. If you are debating it today, you probably should have had it 3 weeks ago.
So let's say we have triaged the situation. The conversation absolutely must happen this week. The intellectual exercise is over. How do you actually formulate the words?
This brings us to the core of the material, the surgical approach. A 4-part framework for initiating the discussion.
This is the practical application. Step 1. Name the difficulty.
Right. The most perilous moment is the opening sentence. The first 5 seconds dictate everything. You begin by stating, "I have been wanting to talk to you about something, and it has been hard for me to bring up."
Let's unpack the psychology there. On the surface, it feels uncomfortable for a senior clinician to admit hesitation. We are supposed to be bulletproof.
But it is not manipulation, it is radical honesty. By stating it's hard, you instantly signal the gravity of the situation.
You are telling them this is not a casual comment. It is something you have deeply deliberated over.
And it performs a critical de-escalation function. It dismantles the perception that you are launching an ambush. It acknowledges their autonomy.
Right. It frames the interaction not as a top-down verdict, but as two professionals confronting a challenging issue together. You lay down your weapons first.
Exactly, which short-circuits their anticipation of an attack. Then, step 2, be specific. Avoid generalities.
This sounds simple, but in the heat of the moment, it's incredibly difficult. We instinctively use words like always or never because they feel safer.
But generalizations are fatal to resolution. If you say, "You are always dismissive in MGT meetings," that triggers a massive defensive response.
Because always is an absolute. Their brain instantly scans their memory for the one instance they weren't dismissive.
That's completely unfair. Last month, I explicitly asked for your opinion, and the conversation instantly devolves into a petty debate about frequency.
You've lost control. Contrast that with a specific approach. In the meeting last Tuesday, when I raised the schedule issue, you cut me off.
Look at the difference. You provided a time, a place, and an exact quotation. This makes the issue concrete and addressable.
Generalities make it personal and indefensible. When character is attacked, cognitive capacity to listen vanishes.
Which leads seamlessly into step 3, and this is perhaps the most intellectually demanding part. Describe impact, not motive.
This is so hard. As clinicians, we are conditioned to look at a symptom and deduce the underlying cause. You see a behavior, you construct a narrative about why they did it.
But in interpersonal conflict, this is a massive trap. You do not actually know what is happening inside your colleague's mind.
Okay, I have to push back on this. If a colleague constantly cuts me off and rolls their eyes, I feel like I absolutely know their motive.
You feel you do, yes.
I assume they are arrogant, they lack respect for my expertise, or they are asserting dominance. Are you asking me to pretend I don't know what they're doing?
It requires immense discipline because you are fighting your own brain's pattern recognition. Your assumption, no matter how convinced you are, is mind reading.
So what is the formula?
I noticed X. The effect on me or the team was Y. State the observable fact and the consequence.
If I say, you cut me off because you don't respect me, I've made an aggressive accusation about their internal state.
And their immediate reaction will be to defend their intent. No, I was just stressed because we were short on time. The conversation is derailed.
But they cannot argue with your impact. If I say, when you cut me off, the impact was that I felt my input was unwelcome and it shut down the discussion. That is an irrefutable statement of your lived experience.
Exactly. You keep the discussion anchored to observable reality, and then you must immediately execute step 4, ask, don't tell.
Right. Leave space after speaking. Actively ask for their perspective. How did you see that situation?
The natural tendency is to deliver a monologue, drop the mic, and wait for a tearful apology.
We want total capitulation.
But creating that space is vital. The version of the story you have been ruminating on is never the complete picture.
They might genuinely say, I am so sorry, I just received a critical lab result and my mind was elsewhere. I didn't even realize I did it.
And the massive narrative of malice you constructed evaporates. The conversation that surprises you is always the most useful one.
So we've walked through the ideal pathway. You named the difficulty, you were specific, you focused on impact, you asked questions, perfect surgical technique.
But sometimes the patient crashes anyway.
Exactly. What happens when the colleague does not respond with mature introspection? When it blows up. This brings us to section 4, managing complications.
This is where we must manage our own expectations. Often, despite a flawless approach, they react poorly. They become highly defensive.
Or they launch a vicious counterattack, dredging up a mistake you made 3 years ago just to deflect.
Or they gaslight you, twisting the narrative so you leave wondering if you are the sole cause of the dysfunction.
When that happens, the immediate internal reaction is a crushing sense of failure. You feel you botched it. But the material introduces a vital concept, redefining success.
Yes, you don't have to win. As highly driven clinicians, our default is intensely competitive. We want to win the argument.
But winning was never the point. The sole objective was to bring a festering issue into the open light.
If you clearly and respectfully articulated the problem using the framework, you have succeeded. Full stop.
What your colleague chooses to do with that information is entirely a reflection of their emotional maturity, not a metric of your communication skills.
You are responsible for the delivery, absolutely not the reception.
That is immensely liberating. It leads to another crucial realization, the multi-stage procedure. In orthopedics, we don't resolve a deep infection in a single operation. You put in a spacer and wait.
The exact same concept applies here. You do not have to close the issue in one sitting. Expecting total resolution in a 20-minute meeting between cases is a recipe for frustration.
The first conversation just surfaces the pathology. The colleague is experiencing an acute stress response. They're not cognitively capable of processing feedback in that moment.
The real movement almost always occurs days or weeks later, during a second or third round, after both parties have processed the shock.
So ending a tense meeting by saying, tensions are high, let's both think on this and talk again on Thursday, is not a retreat. It's a highly strategic pause.
It allows the temperature to drop.
But what if their response is not just defensive, but actively hostile? What if they respond with professional retaliation?
If they respond with hostility, that is not a failure of your judgment. You must view their reaction as vital diagnostic data about the true nature of the individual.
You've learned they prioritize their fragile ego over the safe functioning of the clinical team.
Exactly. And how do you use that data? You use it to protect yourself structurally. You no longer rely on informal agreements. You document interactions meticulously.
You ensure a third party is present for contentious discussions. You permanently adjust your expectations of their collaborative capacity.
And crucially, this data informs whether escalation is necessary.
Escalation is often viewed by senior clinicians as the ultimate defeat. Going to a clinical lead or HR feels like admitting you are weak.
We must dismantle that stigma entirely. If a colleague is deeply toxic and resistant to feedback, escalating the issue is the correct professional next step.
It's an act of clinical governance, not personal weakness. You are protecting the system because peer-to-peer resolution has failed.
Now, we have spent a lot of time looking outward today, analyzing the colleague, navigating the aftermath.
But there's one final, absolutely critical step we need to cover. The prerequisite step that must happen before you ever walk toward your colleague's office door.
Yes. Section 5. The hardest conversation isn't with the difficult colleague, it's the brutally honest conversation you must have with yourself.
The internal self-audit. Before you can demand accountability from another person, you must honestly acknowledge how you have been an active participant in the dynamic.
This requires high emotional intelligence. You must recognize that your choice to avoid the issue for 6 months was an active choice with real-world consequences.
By saying nothing, you implicitly permitted the behavior to establish itself as a norm.
Precisely. You must examine your own complicity. Did you send mixed signals by laughing awkwardly at their inappropriate joke?
Or did you vent your frustrations to junior staff in the break room instead of addressing the colleague directly, essentially creating a toxic undercurrent yourself?
Did you enable the dysfunction by constantly working around it? The mature clinician asks the hardest question: what is my specific contribution to this failure?
Now, I can hear a listener objecting to this right now. They're thinking, hold on, this colleague yells at nurses and ignores protocols. Isn't there a profound danger in taking on blame when the fault clearly lies with a toxic colleague?
It's a fair challenge. But this internal audit is not about taking false blame. It is not about absolving the toxic colleague.
It's about evaluating your own specific contribution, even if it's only a mere 5% of the overall problem.
If the larger fault is 95% theirs, you still must own your 5%. Own your avoidance or your passive aggression.
Why is this so crucial, though?
Because this internal clarity grounds you. It strips away the aura of absolute self-righteousness, which is lethal to effective communication.
Right, if you walk into that room feeling like a flawless martyr addressing a demon, the conversation will fail.
The clinicians who navigate conflict best have universally already had the harder, more painful conversation in the mirror. They have processed their own complicity.
You enter the room as a flawed professional seeking a practical solution with another flawed professional. You are dealing in reality, not ego.
Exactly that.
So as we draw this deep dive to a close, let's synthesize this journey. Think back to that commute we talked about at the beginning.
The face of the person you are avoiding.
Yes. The difficult conversations you indefinitely postpone shape the trajectory of your clinical career just as decisively as the complex surgeries you perform.
The framework is deeply practical. Notice when waiting becomes active avoidance. Use the 4-part START. Name that it's hard, be specific, focus on impact over motive, and ask.
And remember the post-operative care. Don't force a one-sitting resolution. Allow for the multi-stage process.
And do that internal audit first.
Clinicians who master this end up with cleaner relationships, highly functioning teams, and an end to the quiet exhaustion of carrying unsaid grievances.
It changes everything about your daily clinical practice.
It really does. Now, if today's deep dive gave you the clarity to finally tackle that conversation you've been avoiding, please take a second to rate the show and share it with a colleague who might need to hear it.
I will leave you with this final provocative thought.
Go ahead.
Consider the relationship you have with the colleague you are avoiding right now. Is that relationship being defined by the work you do together? Or entirely by the silence you are both maintaining? You are already communicating loudly, just not with words. Talk soon.